Hurry up. Turn the volume that down on this. I can hear that typing.
I can hear you.
Right, I've had to get out of that because it was slowing down the system.
It's 10 o'clock.
10 o'clock. Okay. Stop sharing. Share. Redundancies. PowerPoint. Okay. Broadcast. Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to another live event with Wurkplace. Today, we're going to be going through redundancies and what to do and going for the 11 steps of redundancies. So first, I'd like to look at the areas in the session. The areas in the session are the 11 points in which you need to have in place before you can go through your redundancies. And we have Karen Owen here today, who's going to go through that process. Please, can you talk us through then the redundancy process for small scale redundancies up to 19 staff, please? Karen.
Yeah, absolutely. Morning, everybody. Hope everyone's all right. If you do find that redundancies may be a possibility within the business, firstly, you should identify how many people you may be proposing to make redundant and whether or not you have a redundancy policy in place. That's really important. If you do have a redundancy policy in place, then I would suggest that you follow this and ensure that it complies with ACAS guidelines. If you do not have a redundancy policy, then I'm going to talk you through 11 steps that we recommend companies follow if you are considering making up to 19 people redundant. If you are proposing large-scale redundancies of 20 staff and over, which are known as collective consultancy redundancies, then we suggest that you contact Wurkplace directly for any assistance, and we can work with you as legal requirements regarding collective consultation apply, such as consulting for a minimum period, and letting the redundancy payment service know that the plans before the consultation starts. Okay.
Okay. Thanks, Karen. So let's go through the 11 steps then, Karen. Moving on to one step, making a redundancy plan.
Okay, so step one, if you are making a redundancy plan, this will help you manage each step of the redundancy process. It should show how the company will avoid compulsory redundancies. You should show how you're going to consult with staff. You should also show how you're going to select staff for redundancy. You should be looking at how you're going to be giving staff notice, working out redundancy payments, and also, really important, supporting staff and plans for the future. Where it's applicable, companies should work with staff representatives, for example, trade unions, to develop the plan if it's a large or complex redundancy situation. Having an agreed plan allows companies to easily share information with all its help and with all its staff and help them understand what's happening. It's particularly useful when you explain your proposed changes during the consultation phase to have a plan. Once you have made your redundancy plan, you should then move on to step 2, which is demonstrating how the company is going to avoid compulsory redundancies. Okay.
So basically the main points there we have are to avoid compulsory redundancies, consult with staff, that's a huge one, select the staff for redundancy, give staff notice, and work out redundancy payments and support staff through the plan for the future. Okay, let's move on to step 2 then, avoid compulsory redundancies.
That's fine. Okay, so it may be possible that the company can avoid job losses by planning ahead and looking at other options available to the business. Last Thursday, I discussed options that may be available to businesses as opposed to looking at making staff redundant. This could include retraining employees to do other jobs in the business, restructuring the business, other things as such short-term working. Companies could also look at using a layoff clause and laying off staff, but only if they have a relevant clause within their contract of employment. Companies could also look at offering voluntary redundancy or early retirement. Another option would be to consult with staff and both parties, both the company and the staff, agree to flexible working, such as temporarily reducing working hours, job sharing, working compressed hours, or even home working, continuing with that. Companies could also possibly look at staff benefits. Staff could possibly take unpaid leave. Another option would be staff taking holidays, letting go of temporary or contract workers, and limiting or stopping overtime, or a really, really straightforward one, don't hire any more employees. If you are, this is something that I really think is important. Please be mindful, if you are considering offering voluntary redundancy or early retirement, you don't put pressure on anyone to single them out. It must always be the employee's choice to volunteer, and make it clear that voluntary redundancy or early retirement is not automatically given. And the company must have a fair way of selecting staff for either one or the other. So just because somebody asks for voluntary redundancy, it doesn't mean that it's given that they'll get it. The company could also offer maybe an enhanced redundancy package over and above the statutory minimum, which we'll go into later on in our steps, to encourage staff to volunteer. But they're just a couple of things, that companies should be looking at in their plan, as opposed to actually full-on redundancies.
Okay. But what if you've exhausted these options then? You've gone through all the options, you looked at fair wage and so forth. Redundancy does look likely.
Well, if you have exhausted these options and still envisage that you may have to look at redundancies, then what we'd recommend is you'll move on to move forward and go on to step 3, which is consulting with your employees.
Okay. So let's move on to step 3 then, please, if you would.
Okay, boss. Okay, no problem. Okay, so if you are consulting with your employees, you must sit down with them and explain your plan changes and get their feedback and input. This is really important, because the outcome must not be finalised at this stage, and you should aim to include any employee suggestions or ideas that you agree with.
Okay. When you say sit down in these current times that we're in, would sit down include, like we're doing now, a Zoom meeting, a one-to-one meeting?
It would.
Consider.
Yeah, it would. So during the coronavirus, you must consult with your employees, and it's likely that you'll need to do this remotely. It's just a fact, unless people are in work. Options you can look at are Microsoft, Zoom, FaceTime, Skype. I think there's a couple more, or you could even telephone to staff, to communicate with them. But what I would recommend is you obtain their consent in the first instance, just to ensure that they're happy to consult in this way.
When you say consent, is that them giving you their consent to go ahead?
Speak to them. Just get them to agree that that they are happy to consult in this way.
Okay.
Yeah, just get them to either verbally
clarification, basically verbally or signed, to say that they're happy to go over and have a Zoom meeting rather than a one-to-one.
I mean, it's always best to have it in writing, but if you can't get it in writing, an email, or at least, worst case, if you can only get it via verbally, then at least make a file note, so at least you've got a log of that happening. You must also consult trade unions or union representatives if you do have those, especially during large-scale collective redundancies. You must also ensure that you consult with employees who are on any other type of leave, such as maternity leave. So if they're, if they're involved within the redundancy process, then obviously you must consult with them.
And furlough as well, and furlough leave.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And you can during the consultation period, you must get the information ready that you're going to share, and during the consultation period you should let the employees know in writing things like why you need to make redundancies, the number of employees at risk and which jobs are at risk, how you will select employees for redundancy, how you plan to carry out the redundancies, and that includes timeframes, how you will calculate their redundancy pay, details of any agency workers you're using, and you should ideally have a trained person to lead the consultation and a clear way of presenting the redundancy plan. It's really important here that you don't present a finalised redundancy plan to the staff, and you must include in your total of employees any voluntary redundancies or employees you propose to move into other roles.
Could you just go over that last point again, Karen, just to clarify that? It's imperative that...
Yeah, it's imperative that you do not present a finalised redundancy plan to the staff, and you must basically to show that you haven't made your decision already. And you must include in your total of employees any voluntary redundancies or employees you propose to move into other roles. There's no rules for how long the consultation should last. It can last longer than the minimum periods listed above. If it's a large, it can last longer than the minimum periods if it's a large or complex redundancy situation, but you do not need to reach agreement for the consultation to come to an end. You just need to show that the consultation was genuine and that you aim to reach agreement. And you must be able to show that you've listened to your employees and that you responded to questions and suggestions they've put forward. Okay,
so you must listen to their questions and that they put forward. Yeah. And the response to any suggestions. So you have to reply to the response.
Yeah.
Of any suggestions. Okay. Yeah. That's great, guys. There's a lot of info here, and we will at the end of this forward any slides to you that we feel you need to see. So all the slides, I think we did that last week as well. We forwarded on all the PDFs. We've got the marketing to send them out. We've got your emails. We'll do the same again this time. So moving on to number 4. What to discuss at the consultation. So if you could take a look at step 4 for us, please, Karen.
Yeah, of course. So consultations allow you to explain why you're planning on making redundancies. And in return, it allows employees to discuss ways to avoid or reduce redundancies and how to reduce the impact of redundancies, how the organisation can restructure or plan for the future, and also how employees are selected for redundancy. One thing that companies must do is consider and respond to any suggestions made by employees. You can reject any ideas you don't think are reasonable, but you should explain your reasons why. So if someone puts something forward, then you must go back to them and say, well, the reason why I didn't use that this particular reason was because, and then give your reason. It's important to document all the discussions and the reasons for your decisions. You might not always be able to avoid redundancies, but by working with employees, you'll often be able to save jobs and come up with a better idea of how the business can plan for the future. We've done redundancies in the past whereby, a company's thinking, I cannot do anything other than make redundancies. And employees come back to them with something and it's blown them out the water and it's resulted in people's jobs being saved. It can happen.
So communication is the key with the employees.
Yeah, they might come up with some good ideas. They're the ones doing the job.
And not just burn something because it's your train set, basically.
Yeah.
Okay.
Companies should try at all times to be as open as possible with employees' unions, if there is a recognised union, and employee representatives, if there are any. This allows employees to feel part of the conversation. You should give employees the right level of detail so that they understand the proposals that you are making, and so they're not confused, because it's quite a heavy topic. People can get confused easily. You have to be clear. If there are employee representatives, then you would normally consult with the employee If there are employee representatives, you would normally consult with them first and then employees individually afterwards. If there are no employee representatives, we would recommend consulting with staff individually on smaller scale redundancies, which is what we're discussing today.
Brilliant. Okay. Let's move on to step 5. Once I pull all my slides up, I was that engrossed then in step 4 that I forgot.
Am I that interested?
You are indeed. So let's go to number 5, which is selecting employees for redundancy. So how do we do that? How can you do that?
Good question. You must select employees for redundancy in a fair way, and you must not discriminate against any individuals or groups. It's good to use what we call a selection criteria, and this will help you choose which employees to make redundant.
Okay, so how can you ensure you minimize then the risk of discriminating against an employee?
Okay, that's a good question. Thank you very much for that one. Okay, so you should aim to base the criteria on an employee's standard of work. You could look at skills and qualifications or experience. You could look at their attendance records, but don't include absence relating to disability or maternity, because you're on a very sticky wicket there.
Yeah.
You could also look at their disciplinary record. You must not select employees because of their age, disability, gender reassignment, marriage or civil partnership status, pregnancy or maternity leave. Trying to think of all these now. Race. You can't select on religion or belief, sex orientation, any family-related leave. And what I mean by that is parental, paternity or adoption leave. You can't select on a role as an employee because they're basically a trade union representative. You can't select on whether they're full or part-time, and also paying working hours. One thing to be really clear on is during the coronavirus pandemic, you must not select employees for redundancy just because they're shielding. This again could be seen as a disability discrimination.
Okay. Great. There's a lot there. There's a lot of things you should do. There's a lot of things you shouldn't do. Again, they'll be
posted to remember them all.
Slides, and we'll try and get some into those slides as well, to the do's and don'ts. Let's move on to step 6 now, which is agree criteria with employees.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so you should agree criteria with your employees. It would be positive if companies could consult employees to identify and agree a selection criteria. An example of this is if you could sit down with employees and work out the skills and experience needed for the business in the future, because you've got to think of the future now. It's not just now, the present. The more open and collaborative the selection process is, the more your employees will trust that it's fair and they'll feel involved. I might be able to give some feedback.
Yeah, I think that's a big one, that example, because I think some employees would go in and look at skills or stuff that they've done for maybe the business we had before COVID-19, but the way we're making redundancies is because of COVID-19. So you've got to look at those skills, what they can bring in the future to the business under these trying times. So I think that is a big one there, big example. Thanks, Karen, for that. So step 7 sees us advising to ensure that you select employees in a fair way. Can you take us through that, please, Karen?
Of course I will. Okay, it's a good idea to score employers against all the agreed selection criteria that you choose. This will help you avoid relying on one particular criteria, and it can lower the risk of discriminating against employees if you can show that obviously what your selection criteria was. It will also help you be objective when selecting employees, and you can easily share with staff how the selection process works. They'll understand it, and it'll allow them to explain it'll allow you to explain your decisions at any employment tribunals should an employee choose to make a claim against the business. You're protecting the business. The business could request, I don't know, employees reapply for their jobs, and you could score them at an interview using the selected criteria, and this would ensure that you were selecting people in a fair way. You would then score your employees and select the employees for redundancy on this basis on the selection process. So I'll repeat that again. You would then be able to score your employees and select the employees for redundancy on a scoring basis. Okay, you can do that.
So I think that would take us on to point 8. So at this stage, you would recommend setting up an appeals process.
Yeah, you would. It's a requirement if you want to go through any. Okay, so you should set up an appeals process for employees who feel they have been unfairly selected. This reduces the chances of someone making a claim against you should they bring an employment tribunal. You should explain in your redundancy plan how someone can appeal. That should be within your redundancy plan. You might meet with employees face to face or by Skype, or by Zoom, like we mentioned earlier, and you should listen to their concerns or ask them to write a letter or email explaining why they do not agree with your decision. That's really imperative, and they have to have an appeals process.
So you have to have an appeals process and have to set out that appeals process to them whilst making them redundant.
Yeah, I mean, I'll go on to that later on in the other steps, but the appeals process must be given to the employees once they've had the outcome of the redundancy, whether they're if they've been made redundant.
That moves on to step 9.
Okay, so step 9 is whether or not to give employees notice as to whether or not their position within the business is being redundant. Okay, so you can only make an employee redundant once you finish consulting with everybody. It's best to tell the employee face to face via Skype or Zoom or face to face if you're making them redundant, and to follow up with confirmation in writing. Okay, so if their position is not redundant, then this should also be confirmed to them in writing as to when they'll be required to return to work in their existing or new role. If that person has a new role, then they should be given an offer letter, job description, and a contract of employment should be provided them straight away. That must be provided to them before they commence with a new role, and that's in line with legislation that came out in this month, which we've previously spoken about. At this meeting, you should also advise them the reason for them being made redundant. If they are actually being made redundant, you should advise them the reason for them being made redundant, along with what their notice will be, whether they're entitled to statutory redundancy pay and what it is, how much it is, their leaving date, that must be clarified, whether they are being paid in lieu of notice, how you've calculated their redundancy pay. That should also be explained. Any other monies they're owed, such as holiday pay. Also, how and when you will pay them, what dates. Will it be through the normal payroll system? Will you pay them by backs? How will it be paid? You should also elaborate how you will retrieve any work items they may have, because they might have a laptop or they might have keys to the offices. You also need to confirm that, taking into consideration, obviously, the restrictions at the moment. And also, they may have any items, they may have left some stuff in work. How are you going to get that stuff back to them if they don't actually return to work? And you should also confirm who can appeal and who the appeal person is. The appeal person who they appeal the decision to, or the process, should be someone who's not been involved in the redundancy process. So if you've made the decision to make them redundant, you can't then be the appeal person. It has to be someone who hasn't been involved. Yeah.
So always bear that in mind then when you're going through and using your resource of staff or outsourcing to a company like Wurkplace. Make sure you have someone available that can pick up, i.e. in senior management, that can pick up that appeals process to make it fair and easier.
Exactly. Okay. Yeah, and in relation to their notice, companies should check the employee's contract of employment as to what notice period they are entitled to. However, the minimum, what I will elaborate on now, is the minimum statutory notice payments are 1 week for anyone between 1 month and 2 years service. It's 1 week for every full year worked between 2 to 12 years served, and a maximum of 12 week statutory notice for anyone with 12 full years or more. Also, what's within the employee's contract of employment and how you provide the employee with a confirmation of the redundancy will depend on when their notice starts from.
Could you repeat that for us, Karen?
Cheers. Okay, so in relation to their notice, companies should check the employee's contract of employment as to what notice period they are entitled to. The minimum statutory notice periods are 1 week for between 1 month and 2 years full service.
So that's 1 week and 1 week's pay for 1 month to 2 years service, yeah?
Yeah, unless their employment contract overrides that. They're then entitled to 1 week for every full year worked between 2 to 12 years.
Okay, so that's 1 week for every full year worked between 2 and 12 years. Maximum of 12 months statutory notice. Yeah, you get
a maximum of 12 weeks statutory notice for anyone with 12 years full years or more. And what's within the employee's contract of employment and how you provide the employee with a confirmation of the redundancy will depend on when their notice starts from.
Okay, super.
It's complex. It's as I say, I'm talking you through this now, but as I say, it's a big process to go through. It's a lot of information to take in. Okay.
So brilliant. Great. Let's move on to step 10, which is basically how to work out redundancy pay.
Okay, so you must pay redundancy to employees who have an employment contract and have worked for 2 full years or more. If you've 2P'd staff across, then normally their notice period with their previous employer should be included in the service they have accrued. You must pay at least a statutory amount to your employees. How much pay each employee gets is very much dependent on their age and how long they have worked for the business, but it's capped at 20 years service. Statutory redundancy is capped at £538 unless an employer decides to pay additional redundancy pay. And the total maximum amount of statutory redundancy pay is £16,140. So if you had someone with full 20 years service, and they, then that is the amount that they could receive. If an employee is over 41, then you pay them 1.5 weeks pay, and again this is capped at £538 per week for each year of work after their 41st birthday. If they were under 41 for any period of the service, then you will calculate the redundancy payment at their normal weekly pay, capped at £538. Okay, it's quite.
So can't go above that. It's capped at that, yeah.
Yeah. Now, an employee is entitled to 1 week's pay for each year of work after their 22nd birthday, and again that's capped at £538, and half a week's pay for each year of full work before their 22nd birthday. Okay, so again, there's so where people can calculate statutory redundancy pay. If you go onto .gov.uk, there is a calculator there where you key in someone's start date, the date, their age, and their full year's service, and that will calculate how much pay they're entitled to.
Well, so
okay.
That's .gov.co.uk and put in statutory redundancy pay.
Calculate it, yeah.
Calculate it, yeah.
Yeah.
Well.
Now you must ensure to check your employee's contract of employment, as you may have to pay more than the statutory amount. It just depends what it says in their contract. If your employees pay changes week to week, then calculate it on the average weekly pay, which according to ACAS is for 12 weeks. I mean, we'd always advise anything up to, an average of the previous 52 weeks average pay, but you can base it on the previous 12 weeks. Now, if the employee didn't work a whole week during the average weekly pay period that you're calculating it upon, then replace it with an earlier week. So if you're calculating their basic pay, if they work different hours each week and are paid different amounts, if you calculate their average pay over the last 12 weeks, and for one of those weeks within the last 12 weeks they were off for a week on sick or whatever, then replace it with an earlier week. Okay. Ideally, unless agreed in writing with your employee, statutory redundancy pay, which is tax-free up to £30,000, should be paid no later than an employee's final day with the employer.
So it should be its last day. The redundancy package should all be put into the pay.
Ideally, yeah. If the last day of work is the 30th of June, then it should be paid that day. Other contractual payments such as notice pay, holiday accrual, etc., should be subject to the usual tax and NI deductions, but the statutory notice pay, the statutory redundancy pay is tax-free up to £30,000. If making the redundancy payment does put your business at risk and you can't afford it, you can always discuss this with your employees being made redundant, and you may be able to agree in writing to pay them over a period of time. I know we've done that with clients who have staggered the payments, the note over a period of months. But you must get the person being made redundant, you must get their authority. And you could also ask the Redundancy Payment Service, the RPS, for financial help if you're insolvent, you can get the RPS to make your redundancy payments, and they'll recover the debt from your assets.
Okay, a lot of information there, hell of a lot.
Yeah,
I think the payment calculator, go to gov.co.uk and put in payment calculator. They will then work that all out for you. Again, if you have any, if you don't want to do this, or you feel it's a bit of a strain on the business, you can get us involved. Just give us a call on the number that's advertised, or you should have our number anyway. For those of our clients already on board, all you have to do is pick up the phone, call the HR help desk, and they'll sort everything out for you in regards to small redundancies. Anything more complex than small redundancies, then obviously that goes on our day rate, which I'm sure Karen and the guys will help you. And the final step, what do you think about in regards to supporting your staff's plan for working life without these staff? So
yeah,
okay. Can you go through that for us?
Yeah, of course I can. I mean, as I say, it's quite stressful going through the redundancy process. But redundancies can create, difficult situations and, conversations within the business. And you should always think how to support the employees who are at risk of redundancy. It's a stressful time for them. They're going to be worrying about how to pay their bills, how are they going to eat. You should also consider supporting managers who are breaking the news. These are people that have to work with these people every day. So they're going to be stressed. They're going to be having conversations they wouldn't normally have. You need to make sure that they are, have the right training and, and support. You should also think how to support, people leading the consultation, those at the top who are actually making the decisions. You should also look at how you can support staff that are staying on afterwards, because it's not just the staff that are being made redundant that will be affected because of this. It's also the staff that are staying. It's often forgotten that those staying on experience stress from seeing colleagues and friends being made redundant. They will also be part of a change in organisation and may feel uncertain about what the business and their role will look like in the future, or even if their roles if their role's secure. So you must support your staff where you can. Examples of supporting staff could be by things of being honest with them, just being really, really speaking to them, giving them, a full picture of, how everything's going to evolve. Counselling. You could have additional meetings with them. You could give assistance to people being made redundant. You could give them access to financial advice where they can go. You can give existing staff, people that are staying, clear plans for the future of your organisation. And you can also help people that are being made redundant, maybe look for the work. You might know somebody that's looking for the staff that you may be able to put them in touch with or help them with their CV.
Yeah, I think that's a big one, that helping people with their CV.
We do that a lot.
And also giving recommendations. Recommendations is a huge one. Communication with staff, recommendations, and just kind of you're letting these guys go, but at the end of the day, you may be in a position whereby you can take them on again in the future if need be. So I think
you do.
Communication to staff and everybody around you, and having a good environment, and having an open door policy as well, where people can come in and speak to you, whether that be an open Zoom policy, or because you can't open your door at the moment. I don't know, but that's my assumptions on that from being a director. So.
Yeah, exactly. What you also must do is you must enable the staff to have a reasonable amount of time to look for another job or training if you're making them redundant and they've worked for you for 2 full years. So if during their notice period you need them to work and they get an interview, I don't know, with Tesco or whoever, then you must give them reasonable time off to have an interview as well. You can't say no. That's criteria. And if the situation is handled in the right way, it can make a massive difference to how staff react and cope with being made redundant. The morale of staff who are staying on, it can help massively. The success of the plan changes and future of the organisation, and it can also make a big difference to the organisation's reputation as an employer. Because people go out, when people leave, they go and they might be speaking to your future prospective employees. It's important. Remember, at the end of this, and when the company's undertaking whatever measures it must undertake in order to survive and move forward, you're going to have to bring those that have survived the restructures or the reduced hours of work back to work. So as I referred to in last week's webinar, morale may be low, people will be uncertain, and it could take a while getting back to normal. Some employees may still have children who are off at school, they may need support with. This is why I keep reiterating it's imperative that you invest in the services of a professional such as Wurkplace or some other experienced person to be able to guide you through this in the aftermath. Because those of you who've experienced the restructures and redundancies will know that in many circumstances, it's sometimes more difficult managing the changes that be made over the next, over the next 6 to 12 months than it was to make the decisions in the first place. So you'll actually find that you'll think, oh my God, the redundancy process was difficult, but you've now got to manage that aftermath. How are people going to do the work that those other people that have been made redundant will, how will those jobs be covered? It's going to be a massive cultural change for everybody, and you've got to think ahead. Yeah,
that's huge. There's different grants and schemes at the moment getting publicised. And by the way, guys, for everyone that may be interested, on the 4th of May, the Bounce Back grant and the portal will be open on gov.uk. So if anyone's finding it hard at the moment to get finance or wanting finance or needing finance for future plans to get themselves out of this recession, it's not really this. Well, yeah, it is really, isn't it? To bounce back. They've now put this portal open, so that's available from the 4th of May. I'll put that out on our LinkedIn as well. So if you want any information on that, the link is there. Copy and paste that link and get it ready if you do need that. But there's other grants being given out, like the 10 grand and up to 50 grand on the job retentions in Wales and so forth, and the rest of the UK. Can these grants be used at all to substitute redundancy payments?
The latest the government have been quite silent on redundancy, but the latest guidance from the government confirmed that grants cannot be used to substitute redundancy payments. That's all they've said. HMRC will continue to monitor businesses after the scheme's closed. That's all we've been told. Okay. But please remember that any redundancy process may be deemed unfair if the employer does not at least consider furlough as a potential alternative at the planning stage. So also make sure that you've obviously looked at, you've considered furlough as a potential alternative to people being made redundant.
So we had a question in earlier in regards to the furlough, and I know you can answer because we've discussed this already in regards to the furlough. If you've put them on furlough and you want to add them to the redundancy list or selection, you can do that, yeah, or no?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
The only thing that the government has said, as I said earlier, the only thing that the government has said at the moment is you can't use the grant to substitute redundancy payments. They haven't elaborated whether that's for redundancy notice pay or whether that's redundancy lump sum statutory pay. That's all they've said. As soon as we know anything else, we will be advising, obviously, people of the updates. I mean, the government is throwing out updates every day. They're sneaky. They do it in the morning. So you wake up in the morning and you're given a big list of changes. But yeah, I mean, we will keep clients up to date as and when we know whether or not you can use, whether or not you can use the furlough payment for towards a notice pay. If you are making people redundant, but we will let people know, anything that comes out, we will update our clients and everything.
Thanks very much, Karen. It's good today. Thank
you.
No
problem.
Guys, that was very long-winded in regards to the information. Not you, Karen. Just the information that's given out. There's a lot of information there. I will follow up with the slides and any additional information or any different information that Karen was speaking about there. I'll get her notes and we'll get them all typed up and we'll get them sent over to you as well. One thing I will say though is if you are considering redundancy and you do need a handout there, you can rely on us, get in contact with us and we'll help you and guide you through the whole process. If you're a client, again, don't do anything without contacting us first, please. We're good at cleaning up, but let's make sure we do it properly in the first place, so we don't have.
But it's a last resort.
Yeah, that's a very
you should look at all the alternatives first.
Yeah, and there are some grants. There's some grants out there, and if you need a hand on any grants, go to my LinkedIn, give me a private message me, and I'll try and help and guide you through the grants. We've looked at every grant out there, every scheme out there, and I can tell you any shortcuts or any ways of getting these grants. Once again, thank you all for attending. If you have any questions, please give us the questions or ring up the HR help desk and they'll answer any questions you have in regards to this or any other subject. We are live on the 14th of May with how we managing going back into the workplace, and looking at those mental stresses and so forth, and whether workplace and changes in different change environments. I believe that's already out, so jump onto that. Thanks again, Karen. And
Thank you.
I'll
Sorry
give you a
it's so
call. Thank you,
long-winded.
everybody else, and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.